I am Julian, 35 years old. 3 weeks after the absolute most important day of my entire life, my own flesh and blood father showed up on my front lawn with 2 armed police officers, desperately trying to have me arrested for a major felony. While I was still actively trying to process the agonizing fact that my entire family had deliberately boycotted my wedding, leaving 3 rows of church pews completely empty, my parents looked me dead in the eye through a text message and essentially told me that my only value on this earth was to be an open wallet for my younger brother. They demanded over $8,000 the morning after I got married. When I finally said no, my father decided to ruin my life. He stood on the grass that I had just mowed the weekend prior, pointed a shaking finger at me, and screamed to the entire neighborhood that I was a criminal who had stolen his life savings. But there is one massive, undeniable thing they did not know. They had absolutely no idea that I had my secure military banking app ready to go, a direct line to a federal-based security officer on speed dial, and a ruthless lawyer who specializes in federal civil lawsuits already drafting a devastating case against my father. And right now, the man who tried to put me in handcuffs is the one facing catastrophic legal and financial ruin, begging for a way out of the suffocating trap he built with his own 2 hands. Before I tell you exactly how I masterfully turned the tables on the toxic man who tried to destroy my new family, please hit that like button right now if you believe in absolute justice and standing up to abusive family members. And do not forget to let me know exactly where you are watching from in the comments below. Your support is the greatest motivation for me to keep sharing the truth. Now, let us go back to the exact moment this nightmare erupted on my property. I remember the exact, visceral sensation of pulling my truck into my driveway that Tuesday evening. I had just finished a grueling 14-hour shift at the Naval Intelligence Base. I was exhausted, my uniform felt heavy, and all I wanted was to walk through my front door, drop my keys on the counter, and eat dinner with my new wife, Sarah. But the moment I turned onto my quiet suburban street, I saw the blinding strobe of red and blue emergency lights violently bouncing off the vinyl siding of my house and the houses of my neighbors. There were 2 police cruisers parked haphazardly right in front of my mailbox. And standing right there, right in the middle of my perfectly manicured front lawn, was my father, Arthur. Arthur was 62 years old. He was a former local county judge who had retired a few years prior, a man who had spent his entire adult life dictating the fates of other people and believing that his word was the absolute, unquestionable law. He was wearing his favorite tan golf jacket, standing with his chest puffed out, gesturing wildly with both of his hands as he spoke to a very stern-looking police officer. The entire neighborhood was outside. Mrs. Gable, the elderly woman from next door who always complained about the height of my hedges, was standing on her porch in her bathrobe with her arms crossed. The president of the local homeowners association was whispering to another neighbor across the street. My father had deliberately chosen this time of day because he wanted an audience. He wanted maximum public humiliation. He wanted to ensure that my reputation in this community was completely, utterly destroyed. When I stepped out of my truck, the heavy thud of my boots on the concrete driveway seemed to echo. My father immediately stopped talking to the officer. He turned his head slowly and looked directly at me. And then he smirked. It was a very specific, chilling smirk. I had been looking at that exact facial expression my entire life. I saw it when I was 10 years old and he grounded me for a month because his golf clubs got scratched, even though my brother was the one who dropped them. I saw it when I was 18, packing my bags for military basic training while he sat on the couch reading the newspaper, not even bothering to say goodbye. At 35 years old, I had finally learned how to read exactly what that smirk meant. It meant, I have you completely cornered, and there is absolutely nothing you can do to escape my authority. Officer Bennett, a local patrolman I recognized from seeing him at the community center, separated himself from my father and began walking toward me. He had the rigid, careful posture of a man who had just been handed a very serious criminal complaint by a former judge, and he was treating me with extreme caution. His hand rested naturally near his duty belt. "Good evening, sir," Officer Bennett said, his voice devoid of any warmth. "I need you to step away from your vehicle. Your father, Mr. Arthur here, has just filed a formal complaint claiming that you maliciously wire-transferred funds from his private bank account without his explicit authorization. He states you wiped out a large portion of his liquid assets. We are looking at a potential felony theft charge right now. Felony. The word hung in the humid night air like a physical weight. My mind did not panic. Instead, it immediately went into a highly structured threat assessment mode. I am a military intelligence commander. I hold a top-secret security clearance that requires rigorous background checks, polygraphs, and a completely spotless civilian record. I have spent 14 grueling years of my life building a flawless professional reputation from absolutely nothing. I oversee classified briefings that deal with national security. I manage operations that ordinary people never even hear about. Everything I had built, my impressive salary, my hard-earned promotions, my ability to pay the mortgage on the real estate I owned, my ability to provide a safe life for Sarah, all of it was suddenly balancing on the edge of a razor blade. A felony charge, even a completely fabricated and false one, would trigger an automatic and immediate suspension of my security clearance pending a massive federal investigation. I would be benched. I could potentially face a court-martial if the civilian charges stuck. My father knew this. He knew exactly where to strike to cause the maximum amount of catastrophic damage to my life. I took one very long, deliberate breath. In my specialized military training, we practice this specific breathing technique. It is designed to rapidly bring your heart rate down in high-stress combat situations where allowing your heart rate to spike will cloud your judgment and get you killed. I let the breath out slowly. I looked directly at Officer Bennett, completely ignoring my father who was now stepping closer, eager to see the fear in my eyes. "Officer Bennett," I said, my voice projecting with the calm, measured authority of a commanding officer. "Before we proceed any further with this conversation, I need to ask you a procedural question. Is your body camera currently powered on? And is it actively recording both audio and video?" Bennett looked slightly taken aback by the sheer lack of panic in my voice. He blinked, glancing down at his chest. "Yes, sir. It is recording." "Good," I replied instantly. "I want every single second of this interaction documented for the official police record and for the inevitable civil lawsuit that will follow tonight's events." I reached slowly into the right pocket of my uniform trousers. My father flinched noticeably, perhaps hoping I was going to do something aggressive that would justify him screaming for my immediate arrest. Instead, I calmly pulled out my smartphone. But before I tell you what was on that screen, and how it completely shattered my father's entire universe in a matter of seconds, you need to deeply understand the staggering magnitude of what was actually happening on my lawn. This was not a simple family dispute over a few dollars. This was the explosive climax of 35 years of severe emotional abuse, toxic financial manipulation, and a lifelong campaign to make me feel completely worthless. To understand why my own flesh and blood wanted me in federal prison, you have to understand the dynamic of the golden child, the twisted reality of my family's finances, and the devastating wedding day that finally broke my heart forever. If you looked at my family from the outside, you would see a perfectly polished, flawless American success story. My father, Arthur, was a respected legal mind in our affluent county. My mother, Eleanor, was the quintessential suburban matriarch. She was the aggressive president of the local homeowners association, always organizing charity bake sales, hosting incredibly extravagant Thanksgiving dinners with 30 guests, and making sure everyone in town knew how perfect her family was. But behind the heavy oak doors of our home, the dynamic was poisonous, and the roles were strictly assigned from the day my younger brother and I were born. My younger brother, Leo, was the undisputed golden child. He was 3 years younger than me, but he consumed every ounce of oxygen in the room. I was simply the contingency plan, the backup generator, the insurance policy. Leo could do absolutely no wrong. If Leo failed a crucial math test in high school, my mother would storm into the school and accuse the teacher of being incompetent and biased. If Leo got into a physical fight on the football field, my father would threaten the other teenagers' parents with a massive lawsuit. I, on the other hand, was expected to be completely flawless just to remain invisible. I mowed lawns all summer just to buy my own school clothes. I bagged groceries to save up for a heavily used, rusted sedan when I got my driver's license. There was no college fund waiting for me. My father made it abundantly clear during my senior year of high school that his substantial financial resources, his diverse real estate portfolio, and his massive 401k were strictly reserved for Leo's future elite university tuition and business ventures. That was the reality I accepted. I joined the military straight out of high school because it was the only possible way I could afford to get a higher education and build a life of my own without begging for scraps from a man who despised me. The most glaring, sickening example of this extreme imbalance happened the year Leo turned 16. I was 19 at the time, already sweating through the brutal agony of military basic training, earning my own meager keep, and sending a portion of my small salary back home because my mother constantly cried about the rising cost of utilities. For Leo's 16th birthday, my parents threw a massive party at the country club. And then, they walked him outside and handed him the keys to a brand new, custom-ordered Porsche. I remember coming home on a brief military leave a few weeks later. I pulled up to my parents' massive house in my beat-up, rattling used sedan, and I saw that gleaming, ridiculously expensive sports car sitting proudly in the driveway. Felt like a physical slap to the face. Exactly 2 months later, Leo wrapped that beautiful Porsche around a thick telephone pole on a rainy Tuesday night. He was driving recklessly, going way over the speed limit, trying to show off for a group of his friends. By an absolute miracle, he walked away without a single scratch. But the car was completely, irreparably totaled. The insurance company conducted an investigation, determined Leo was entirely at fault due to reckless driving, and the payout they offered did not even come close to covering the massive remaining loan balance on the vehicle. My father was absolutely furious. But he was not furious at Leo for almost killing himself or someone else. He was furious at the financial inconvenience. He paced the hospital waiting room, loudly complaining about the depreciation of the vehicle, while Leo sat there playing a game on his brand new smartphone. That night, my mother called me. I was back on base, exhausted from a training exercise. She used her typical, highly calculated emotional manipulation. She sobbed into the phone, telling me that the family was in a terrible financial bind because of the lawyers they had to hire to keep Leo out of legal trouble regarding the crash. She said Leo's future college fund was at severe risk. She said that as the older, responsible brother who had a steady government paycheck, I needed to step up and perform my duty to the family. She heavily implied that if I did not help, I would be written out of any future inheritance entirely. I was young. I was deeply conditioned to seek their approval. I ended up transferring them my entire military salary for 3 consecutive months to help cover the massive deficit. I completely drained my own emergency savings account. I lived on base rations and did not go out with my friends for half a year. They did not ask me if I was okay. They simply demanded the money under the twisted guise of family loyalty. No one ever thanked me. Leo never once apologized for destroying the car or taking my money. It was simply expected that I would pave a smooth road so that Leo could drive his luxury cars all over it. This toxic pattern continued relentlessly for the next 15 years. Leo went on to have 3 massive, spectacular failed business ventures, all funded by my father's equity. He went through a brutal, incredibly messy divorce that involved a vicious custody battle, which cost my parents tens of thousands of dollars in high-priced lawyer fees to secure his rights. He lived a lavish lifestyle he could never actually afford on his own. Meanwhile, I quietly built my career in military intelligence. I climbed the ranks through sheer willpower and relentless dedication. I earned a highly coveted promotion to commander. I invested my salary wisely in real estate, securing my own financial future independent of their wealth. Yet, my father never attended a single one of my promotion ceremonies. He would stand at his country club and tell his wealthy friends that he was incredibly proud of his son serving the country, basking in the stolen glory, but to my face, he always found a way to belittle my achievements. He called my medals trinkets and my salary government welfare. And then, everything changed. I met Sarah. Sarah was a civilian defense contractor working on the naval base. She was brilliant, fiercely independent, and she had this incredible, terrifying ability to look right past my stoic, hardened military exterior. On our third date, we were sitting in a quiet diner late at night. She put her coffee cup down, looked me directly in the eyes, and asked me a question nobody had ever bothered to ask me in my entire life. "Julian," she said softly, "what is the absolute hardest part of your life? Not your job. Your life." I froze. I could have lied. I could have given a generic answer about the stress of command. But I looked at her, and I told her the absolute truth. I told her about the Porsche. I told her about the drained savings accounts. I told her how deeply exhausted I was from constantly trying to earn the love and respect of people who only viewed me as an emergency ATM machine. She did not judge me. She did not offer empty platitudes. She just reached across the table, took my hand, and held it tightly. 11 beautiful months later, I bought a diamond ring. I called my father the very evening I proposed. I stood on the back porch of the beautiful home I had just purchased in Virginia, looking out at the vibrant orange sunset, feeling a profound, overwhelming sense of hope and joy. When my father answered the phone, his tone was immediately impatient. "Make it quick, Julian. We are reviewing some legal documents for Leo's new startup," he barked. I took a breath. "Dad, I just proposed to Sarah. She said yes. We are setting a date for next May, and I want the whole family there. I really want you to be my best man." There was a long, heavy pause on the line. I could hear the television blaring in the background. Then, my father cleared his throat loudly. "Well," he said, his voice dripping with icy indifference, "I will have to check my calendar, Julian. Things are very busy here. Leo is going through a lot of stress with his business. And frankly, a wedding is a massive distraction right now." He did not say congratulations. He did not ask to speak to Sarah. I should have known right then and there. The coldness in his voice was not just his usual arrogance. It was deep, bitter annoyance. By getting married, I was taking the spotlight away from his precious golden child. But I pushed the awful feeling down deep into my stomach. I let my foolish hope do the thinking for me. 3 days later, I received a phone call from my Aunt Clara. Clara was my mother's older sister, a woman who always played the role of the sweet, caring aunt who baked cookies and remembered birthdays. She congratulated me profusely for exactly 2 minutes. But then, the conversation took a very sharp, very deliberate turn. "So, Julian, sweetheart," she purred into the phone, "weddings are so terribly expensive these days. How much are you planning to spend? Is Sarah's family helping? I heard her father has some money. And with your new promotion and your high salary, are you planning to put your real estate properties into a joint trust with her? You really should protect your assets in case of a divorce. Does Sarah know about your inheritance situation?" I answered vaguely, assuming she was just being an intrusive, gossipy old woman. It was not until much, much later that the sickening truth hit me. Aunt Clara was acting as a financial spy. She was gathering critical intelligence for my father. Because in the twisted reality of my family, any wealth I accumulated was secretly viewed as money that could eventually be funneled to Leo when he inevitably failed again. By marrying Sarah, I was legally securing my assets with a wife, effectively cutting off my parents' access to my bank accounts forever. My wedding was not a joyous celebration of love to them. It was a severe financial threat to their retirement plan and Leo's safety net. I stubbornly ignored all the glaring red flags. Sarah and I spent months planning a beautiful, elegant evening ceremony at a historic venue. We meticulously reserved 3 entire long pews at the very front of the venue exclusively for my side of the family. We placed beautiful white ribbons and printed placards with their names on the seats. I bought a brand new, tailored dress uniform. I was completely ready to finally have the picture-perfect family moment I had desperately craved since I was a little boy. But as the weeks ticked by, and the RSVP deadline came and went, my side of the guest list remained completely, utterly blank. The morning of my wedding was supposed to be the absolute pinnacle of my life. The weather was perfect, a crisp, clear May afternoon. I stood alone in front of the full-length mirror in the groom's private dressing suite at the venue. I was meticulously adjusting the gleaming metals on the chest of my navy dress blues. Every single decoration pinned to my chest represented a massive personal sacrifice, a moment of extreme pressure, a deployment where I had risked my life. I looked at the man in the mirror, a commander who had earned the respect of hundreds of soldiers, and I felt a deep, profound surge of pride. Then my cell phone rang on the dressing table. The caller ID flashed my mother's name, Eleanor. I picked it up instantly, my heart soaring, fully expecting to hear her say that they were stuck in traffic, or asking for last-minute directions to the parking lot of the venue. Instead, the voice that greeted me was painfully careful, highly rehearsed, and dripping with that fake, managing tone she always utilized when she was trying to avoid taking responsibility for something terrible. "Julian, sweetie," she began, her voice tight, "we are so incredibly sorry. We are not going to be able to make the drive today." I completely froze. My hand gripped the edge of the dressing table so hard my knuckles turned stark white. "What are you talking about? Mom, the ceremony begins in literally less than 4 hours. You are supposed to be here." I know," she said quickly, dismissing my panic. "But your father's lower back is really acting up terribly today. He simply cannot handle sitting in a car for 3 hours. And honestly, Leo is going through an absolute terrible crisis right now with his new girlfriend. They might be breaking up, and we just cannot leave him alone in this state of mind. It is absolute chaos here at the house. You are strong, Julian. You understand, right? You always understand." I stared at my reflection in the mirror. The silence in the room was deafening. My own mother was standing in her comfortable suburban kitchen, telling me through a phone line that my father's alleged mild backache and my 32-year-old brother's latest pathetic romantic drama were significantly more important than witnessing my wedding day. There was a very specific, heavy silence on the line. It was the kind of silence that contains the ugly, brutal truth that nobody is willing to say out loud. They were not missing my wedding because of a backache. They were deliberately, maliciously boycotting my wedding to punish me. They were punishing me because I had chosen a woman over them, and because I was no longer their compliant, silent financial backup plan. They wanted to make sure I knew exactly where I stood in the hierarchy of the family. Dead last. "We love you, sweetie. Have a beautiful day," she added casually, attempting to quickly soften the devastating blow before I could argue. "Thank you, Mom," I said flatly. My voice sounded hollow, like it was coming from someone else, and I hung up the phone. I did not yell. I did not throw my phone at the wall. I slowly walked into the private bathroom attached to the suite, locked the heavy wooden door behind me, sank down onto the cold tile floor in my pristine uniform, and for the first time in over 10 years, I completely broke down. I sobbed uncontrollably. I cried for the little boy who used to mow lawns just hoping his dad would pat him on the back. I cried for the teenager who gave up his entire savings account to pay for his brother's destroyed Porsche. I cried until my lungs burned and my chest physically ached with the grief of realizing I never really had a family at all. Sarah found me sitting on the floor a few minutes later. She did not ask a single frantic question. She did not worry about wrinkling her breathtaking, incredibly expensive white wedding gown. She simply hiked up her dress, sat down on the cold bathroom floor right next to me, pulled my head onto her shoulder, and held me tightly until my breathing finally stabilized. An hour later, I walked down the aisle. Sarah's massive extended family filled the entire right side of the beautiful venue. There were aunts, uncles, cousins, and friends, all cheering, smiling, and wiping away tears of profound joy. On my left side, the 3 long rows of wooden pews sat completely, devastatingly empty. The pristine white ribbons reserving the seats looked exactly like crime scene tape blocking off a tragedy. It was a massive public humiliation. A glaring, visual representation to all 142 guests of my exact worth to my blood relatives. But I survived the ceremony. And at the reception, Sarah's family completely stepped in and surrounded me. Her father stood up and gave a toast that praised my honor and my dedication. Her mother pulled me into a fierce, tight hug at the end of the night, cupped my face in her hands, and whispered fiercely, You belong to us now, Julian. Do you understand me? You are ours. We will never, ever let you feel alone again. That night, despite the agonizing heartbreak of the empty pews, I felt a profound, overwhelming sense of clarity. The toxic, suffocating cord connecting me to my parents was finally, permanently severed. I was free, or so I foolishly thought. The next morning, Sarah and I were lying in the massive king-sized bed in our luxury hotel suite. It was exactly 8:14 a.m. The morning sun was pouring through the sheer curtains. I was holding my wife, feeling a deep sense of peace that I had not experienced in decades. Then, my cell phone buzzed loudly on the wooden nightstand. I reached over and grabbed it. The notification on the screen showed a text message from my father. My heart did that stupid, involuntary, pathetic little flutter. A tiny, foolish part of my inner child hoped with everything I had that it was a massive apology. I hoped it was a long, heartfelt message explaining how much he deeply regretted missing the most important day of my life, begging for my forgiveness. I unlocked the phone and opened the text message. It read, "Julian, we are in a bind and we need $8,400 immediately for Leo's new business venue deposit. His investors backed out at the last minute and the deadline to secure the lease is Tuesday morning. You have always been the responsible one with a high salary. Transfer the money today so he doesn't lose the opportunity. Let me know when the wire is complete." I stared at the glowing screen, my vision blurring with pure rage. There was not a single word of congratulations. There was absolutely no acknowledgement of Sarah. There was no apology, no explanation for leaving my side of the aisle completely barren. The very morning after my wedding, while I was lying next to my new wife on my honeymoon, my father was demanding over $8,000 to fund yet another one of Leo's doomed financial failures. Sarah rolled over, resting her chin on my bare shoulder. She read the text message silently. I felt her jaw physically tighten against my skin. She didn't scream. She didn't panic. She just looked at me with cold, absolute resolve. "Delete it, Julian," she said softly, but her voice was like steel. "Do not engage with this insanity. You owe them absolutely nothing." She was entirely right, but the white-hot anger burning inside me was a physical, uncontrollable force. This was no longer just about the money. This was about the absolute, staggering audacity of a man who believed he owned me. I did not text him back. I opened my secure banking application. I navigated to the transfer function and pulled up the saved account information for Arthur. The exact same bank account number I had dutifully memorized from years of sending thousands of dollars that I never tracked and never once demanded back. I entered the transfer amount, $1. In the memo line of the electronic transfer, I typed 3 simple words, "Best of luck." I hit the confirm button. The dollar vanished from my account. Then I went into my phone settings. I blocked my father's phone number. I blocked my mother's number. I blocked Leo's number. I put the phone on silent, tossed it onto a chair across the room, and pulled my wife closer to me. I felt a massive, suffocating weight physically lift off my chest. I had finally drawn the absolute final boundary. But when you cut off a parasite that has fed on you for 35 years, it does not just crawl away quietly and die. It attacks you with everything it has. A week later, after Sarah and I returned to our home from our brief honeymoon, I made a critical error in judgment. I unblocked my father's number. It was an old reflex, older than I want to admit. My military training overrides a lot of natural instincts, but it has never fully overridden the deeply ingrained anxiety that says, what if someone is actually dying? What if there is a real medical emergency? The absolute second I unblocked his contact, my phone completely froze as a massive wall of text messages flooded into my inbox. 41 messages in total. They had been stacking up during my week of silence like water building behind a cracked concrete dam. The first 5 messages were demanding. The middle 20 messages were highly accusatory, threatening to ruin my reputation in the family. But the final 16 messages were completely unhinged. I read them sitting at my kitchen counter. "You petty, arrogant little bastard," one text read. After everything I paid for, everything I gave you, you send me $1? You are a complete embarrassment to this family name. Another read. You think those little military medals make you better than us? You think that salary makes you a man? You are nothing without this family. You have always been nothing. I will make sure everyone knows how you treat your own flesh and blood. I read the texts completely clinically, treating them exactly the way I read hostile intelligence assessments at work, without flinching, simply cataloging the threats. Then, another message popped up. It was from an old college friend named Greg. Greg and I had not spoken in over 2 years, but suddenly he was reaching out, attempting to play the role of a neutral peacemaker. "Hey Julian, man," Greg's text read. "I heard things are really rough with your dad right now." He called me. "Look, you know Leo is dealing with a lot. The divorce really messed up his finances. You should just apologize to your old man and send the money to keep the peace. Don't let a lawsuit or something crazy happen over pride." You know, I almost fell for it. I almost believed Greg actually cared. But Sarah, whose entire career revolves around security protocols and background checks, told me to hold off. She pulled up Greg's recent professional social media profile. Sure enough, there it was in black and white. Greg had recently been hired as a high-paid consultant for my father's former law firm. My father had explicitly promised Greg a lucrative contract if he could successfully act as a mediator, guilt me into sending the money, and most importantly, get his hands on a copy of our professional wedding photos. My father desperately needed those photos so he could post them on his own social media, pretending to his wealthy country club friends that he had attended the wedding and everything was fine. The betrayal was absolutely everywhere. They were actively trying to infiltrate and poison my new life from every conceivable angle. I realized right then, sitting at my kitchen island with my brilliant wife, that I was no longer dealing with a difficult, stubborn father. I was dealing with a highly hostile entity, and I was going to treat him exactly like one. I immediately took high-resolution screenshots of every single unhinged text message my father had sent. I downloaded and securely backed up the official bank receipt for the $1 transfer. I documented Greg's manipulative messages and his employment connection to my father's firm. I compiled every single piece of evidence into a secure, encrypted digital file on my personal laptop. I was absolutely not going to allow them to control the narrative of my life anymore. But my father was not content with just sending angry text messages. The situation escalated violently and dangerously 3 days later. I was at the Naval Intelligence Base, sitting in a highly secured briefing room reviewing classified drone surveillance reports. The room was dark, monitors were glowing, and cell phones were strictly forbidden. Suddenly, the secure red landline on the wall of the briefing room began to ring. That phone only rings for extreme emergencies. I answered it. It was Officer Vance, the head of base security and federal military law enforcement for our installation. His voice was incredibly tight, strictly professional, but heavily laced with extreme urgency. "Commander Julian," Vance said sharply, "we have a highly concerning situation currently unfolding at Gate 4. An older civilian male, identifying himself as Arthur and claiming to be your biological father, is demanding immediate entry to the installation. He is acting highly aggressively toward the armed guards. He is actively asking personnel about your specific daily schedule, your exact building assignment, and the exact times you arrive and depart the base." My blood instantly ran ice cold. In my line of work, a military intelligence commander's exact location, daily movements, and schedule are classified information for a very specific, critical reason. Having a disgruntled, angry civilian probing for that highly sensitive operational information at a federal military checkpoint is not a family squabble. It is a massive, severe breach of national security protocols. "Do not let him anywhere near the installation, Vance," I ordered, my voice dropping an octave. "Detain him at the gate if you have to. I am coming down there immediately." By the time I sprinted out of the secure facility and drove my vehicle to Gate 4, Officer Vance and his armed guards had already formally turned my father away, citing strict federal security regulations and threatening him with federal arrest if he did not vacate the premises. My father had sped off in his luxury SUV, screaming obscenities out the window. But the critical damage had already been done. My father had officially, legally crossed the line from being a toxic, annoying parent to becoming a documented security threat to a federal officer. Because of his reckless actions, I was now legally obligated to file a massive, formal incident report with the base command. I had to sit in a sterile interrogation room with a military JAG lawyer and a federal investigator, painstakingly explaining that my own biological father was actively stalking my military assignment in an attempt to harass me over $8,000. To make matters infinitely worse, a colleague of mine, a guy named Mark who had been fiercely gunning for my position and my promotion for years, caught wind of the incident at the gate. Mark was a weasel. He immediately tried to weaponize the situation against me. He went behind my back to our superiors, whispering malicious rumors in the hallways. He told them that I was mentally unstable, that I had massive, hidden financial debts, and that my escalating family drama was making me a severe liability for maintaining my top-secret security clearance. He wanted me stripped of my rank so he could take my job. I did not lash out at Mark. I did not scream at him in the hallway. I did not have to. I am a strategist. I calmly walked directly into the office of my ultimate commanding officer, Colonel Hayes, a man who had served in combat and had absolutely zero tolerance for office politics. I placed a meticulously organized, thick binder directly on his mahogany desk. The binder contained every single printed text message, the bank transfer documentation, the complete timeline of the harassment, and a copy of the official security report from Gate 4. "Sir," I said, standing at perfect attention, "I have a deeply estranged family member who is attempting to initiate a targeted, malicious harassment campaign against me. I am currently handling the situation through legal civilian channels, but I demand total transparency with command regarding my clearance and my status." Colonel Hayes slowly flipped through the binder. He read the unhinged text. He read the security report. He closed the heavy binder, looked up at me with absolute respect and said, "Handle your business, Commander Julian. You have my full support. And if Mark opens his mouth to spread one more rumor about your character, I will personally have him permanently transferred to a windowless desk in a basement." I had secured my flank at work. Now I needed to secure my home. That very evening, Sarah and I went to the hardware store. We purchased the highest-end, high-definition security camera system available. I spent 6 hours climbing ladders, installing the cameras on every single corner of our property, covering the driveway, the front door, the back porch, and the street. We paid a locksmith double to come out at midnight and change every single lock on the house. We turned our home into an impenetrable fortress. The next morning, I made the most important phone call of my life. I called Marcus Stein. Marcus was a heavyweight, incredibly ruthless lawyer who practiced in Virginia. He specifically specialized in the complex intersection of civil harassment law and military security concerns. He had handled high-profile lawsuits involving federal employees facing civilian stalking. I paid his massive retainer fee happily without blinking an eye. I sat in his posh office and laid out the entire strategy. I gave him the encrypted files. "My father is a former judge," I warned Marcus. "He thinks he is completely untouchable. He thinks he can use the law to crush me." Marcus smiled. It was a terrifying smile. "Commander, your father is used to bullying people in a small-town courtroom. He has absolutely no idea what happens when he triggers a federal security apparatus. We are preparing a massive civil lawsuit, a comprehensive restraining order, and we are forwarding the gate incident to federal prosecutors." My father thought I was still the quiet, obedient, terrified teenager who would just take the abuse and hand over my salary to protect his golden child's inheritance. He thought he could bully me into absolute submission with a few angry text messages and a visit to my workplace. He did not realize that the military had spent 14 years teaching me how to fortify a defensive position, patiently wait for the enemy to make a massive, fatal mistake, and then strike back with absolute, devastating, world-shattering precision. And that fatal, irreversible mistake happened exactly 3 weeks later, when he decided to pull into my driveway, step onto my grass, and call the police to arrest me. He thought he was springing a brilliant trap to humiliate me. He had no idea he was stepping right into the jaws of mine. Which brings us right back to that flashing red and blue light, the arrogant smirk on his face, and the police body camera recording every single second of his absolute downfall. I stood on my perfectly manicured front lawn, the grass I had just carefully mowed the weekend prior, and I stared directly into the black glass lens of Officer Bennett's body camera. The flashing red and blue lights from the two parked police cruisers painted the entire neighborhood in a chaotic, rhythmic strobe. It was a humid Tuesday evening in Virginia. The air was thick, the kind of heavy summer heat that just hangs in your lungs and makes everything feel suffocated. But the heaviest thing in that exact moment was the absolute, deafening silence that fell over my property as my father, Arthur, waited for me to completely fall apart. Arthur was standing approximately 10 feet away from me. He had his hands planted firmly on his hips, wearing his expensive tan golf jacket and a pair of perfectly pressed, tailored slacks. He looked like the absolute picture of suburban respectability and wealth. He looked exactly like a retired county judge who had just been terribly, tragically wronged by his own ungrateful flesh and blood. To anyone driving by on the street, to any of my neighbors watching from their windows, he was clearly the victim of a heinous crime. He had spent his entire adult life mastering the dark art of controlling the narrative. In his local courtroom, he dictated the story. At his expensive country club, he controlled the story. And right now, standing on my real estate, he fully believed with every fiber of his being that he was controlling the story. He was absolutely banking on my emotional reaction. He thought he knew me perfectly. Or at least, he thought he knew the terrified, compliant version of me that he had carefully beaten down over 35 years of psychological warfare. He fully expected me to panic. He expected me to raise my voice, to get highly defensive, to start desperately trying to explain myself to the police officers in a frantic, disjointed, guilty way. He wanted me to look completely unhinged. If I got angry, if I yelled at him to get off my property, Officer Bennett would simply see a hostile, aggressive, dangerous military man screaming at his poor, defenseless, elderly father. It was a psychological trap designed with terrifying, calculated precision. But my father forgot one crucial, defining detail about who I am today. I was no longer the desperate 19-year-old kid who emptied his entire bank account to pay for Leo's wrecked Porsche. I was a 35-year-old military intelligence commander. I made a highly lucrative salary analyzing hostile threats, anticipating enemy movements, and remaining entirely composed under catastrophic, life-threatening pressure. I do not break. Officer Bennett took a heavy step closer to me. His hand was still resting instinctively near his duty belt, his fingers brushing against his radio. He was young, probably in his late 20s, and he was clearly trying to handle this extremely volatile situation strictly by the police manual. But he was also heavily influenced by the undeniable fact that Arthur had already spent 20 minutes filling his head with elaborate lies before I even pulled my truck into the driveway. "Sir," Officer Bennett repeated, his voice carrying a very sharp, uncompromising edge of legal authority. "Your father has provided us with a formal verbal statement. He claims that yesterday morning, a sum of exactly $8,400 was wire transferred out of his primary checking account. He states that you are the only other person in the world who has ever had access to that specific routing number, and that you initiated this massive transfer without his knowledge or consent. We need you to answer some questions right now. If you refuse to cooperate, I will be forced to detain you pending a formal federal investigation into this matter." I did not break eye contact with Officer Bennett for a single second. I kept my hands entirely visible, resting naturally and relaxed at my sides, projecting total innocence. "Officer Bennett," I said, keeping my voice incredibly even, low, and completely devoid of any emotional fluctuation. "I am absolutely willing to answer any questions you have tonight. I am fully cooperating with your investigation. But before I say another word about my finances, I want you to simply look at my father. I want you to closely observe his demeanor." Bennett frowned deeply, clearly confused by my terrifyingly calm response. He was used to suspects yelling or running. He glanced over his shoulder at Arthur. Arthur's arrogant, self-satisfied smirk faltered for just a fraction of a second. He realized I was not playing into his trap. So, he quickly and completely shifted his facial expression, pulling his eyebrows together, trying desperately to look like a heartbroken, utterly betrayed parent. He let out a loud, theatrical sigh that belonged in a stage play. "Julian, please," Arthur called out. His voice pitched loud enough for all the neighbors standing on their porches to hear clearly. "Just tell the officer the truth. I don't want to see my own son go to jail and face a massive lawsuit. Just give the money back to the family. I know you are deeply jealous of your brother. I know you might have hidden financial problems or debt, but stealing from your own father? How could you do this to your mother and me after we gave you everything?" It was a masterful, sickening performance. If I did not intimately know the absolute monster hiding behind that expensive jacket, I might have actually felt sorry for him. He was using every single manipulative buzzword designed to make me look pathetic, desperate, and guilty. He was portraying himself as the merciful, loving father, heavily implying he would be willing to drop the severe charges if the prodigal son just confessed to the crime on camera. Mrs. Gable, my elderly neighbor, gasped loudly from her porch. I could hear the whispers traveling down the street like a virus. My pristine reputation in this quiet, peaceful neighborhood was being publicly slaughtered right in front of my eyes. I looked back at Arthur. I did not feel fear. I did not feel the familiar, sickening panic that used to paralyze my vocal cords when I was a child facing his wrath. I just felt a profound, overwhelming sense of absolute pity. He was a small, pathetic, insecure man who was so violently addicted to control that he was entirely willing to commit a federal crime just to force me to obey him. "Officer Bennett," I said, turning my attention back to the patrolman and speaking with absolute clarity. "My father is a former county judge. He is intimately familiar with the legal system. He knows exactly what constitutes a felony. He knows the exact legal definition of theft. And he knows exactly what he is doing right now on my lawn." Bennett narrowed his eyes, his posture stiffening. "What exactly are you implying about his statement, sir?" "I am not implying anything," I replied cleanly, my voice cutting through the humid air. "I am stating a documented fact. My father is currently attempting to use you, your badge, and this police department as a personal weapon to settle a civil family dispute, because I explicitly refused to give him money to pay for my brother's failed business debts. He filed a completely false police report tonight." Arthur immediately exploded. His carefully crafted, heartbroken victim persona completely shattered into a million jagged pieces. He took 3 highly aggressive steps toward me, his face turning a dark, mottled shade of purple rage. "You absolute liar!" Arthur screamed, pointing his trembling finger directly at my face. "You ungrateful, arrogant liar! You think you can talk your way out of this with your fancy vocabulary? You think because you wear that little uniform and get a government salary you are above the law? I have the bank statements at home. I told the officer exactly what you did. Arrest him. Put him in handcuffs right now before he destroys evidence." Officer Bennett immediately threw his left hand up, signaling firmly for Arthur to stop advancing. "Mr. Arthur, step back immediately. Stand by the rear of your vehicle. I am handling this investigation." Arthur stopped, but his chest was heaving violently. He was absolutely furious that his perfect, foolproof trap was not snapping shut the way he envisioned in his arrogant mind. He glared at me with absolute, unfiltered, burning hatred. "You are going to lose everything," Arthur hissed under his breath, though it was still entirely loud enough for the sensitive microphone on the body camera to easily pick up the audio. "Your job, your security clearance, your precious little real estate. I will make sure you have absolutely nothing left when I am done with you." I let his toxic words hang in the air for a moment. I wanted them fully recorded. I wanted every single ounce of his malice documented in high-definition audio and video for Marcus Stein to use in our upcoming civil lawsuit. I waited 3 full seconds, letting the dead silence emphasize his unhinged, criminal threat. "Officer Bennett," I said finally, breaking the tension. "You asked me about a wire transfer. You said my father claimed I stole $8,400 from his private account. I am currently holding my cell phone. I am going to slowly unlock it, open my highly secure military banking application, and show you my entire unedited transaction history for the past 48 hours. Are you prepared to look at the physical evidence?" Bennett nodded slowly. The highly aggressive, accusatory posture he had initially taken was rapidly beginning to fade. He was a smart, experienced cop. He had been working the streets long enough to quickly recognize when a situation was fundamentally not adding up. The frantic, screaming, threatening father did not match the perfectly calm, highly cooperative, completely unfazed suspect. "Show me the screen," Bennett said. I unlocked my screen. I tapped the secure icon for my federal credit union. It required a biometric thumbprint scan to open the vault. I placed my thumb on the glowing sensor. The screen loaded instantly. My father watched me from his SUV, his eyes darting back and forth in confusion. He was entirely confident in his massive lie. He actually believed that because I had ignored his text messages for weeks, he could completely fabricate a financial transaction out of thin air, and the police would simply take the esteemed word of a wealthy former judge over a younger man. He thought the grueling legal investigation alone would be enough to destroy my military career and force me to settle, even if they never found the missing money. For him, the legal process was the punishment. But I was about to show him that I was playing a completely different game. A high-stakes game he had no idea he was even participating in. I held my smartphone out steadily. I did not hand the physical device to Officer Bennett. I simply turned the bright, glowing screen toward his face, ensuring it was also directly in the clear, unobstructed line of sight of his chest-mounted body camera. "Officer Bennett, please read the screen carefully," I said calmly. "This is the primary checking account exclusively linked to my name and my social security number. I want you to look closely at the transaction history for yesterday morning, May 15th, at exactly 8:16 a.m. Bennett leaned his torso in close. He squinted at the glowing screen in the dim, flashing evening light, his eyes tracking the digital text. "I see a wire transfer," Bennett said slowly, his voice completely changing in tone and pitch. It was no longer aggressive or accusatory. It was highly confused and instantly suspicious. "Could you please read the recipient's exact name out loud for the official audio record?" I asked politely. "The recipient is officially listed as Arthur," Bennett read, enunciating clearly. "Account number ending in 4291. "That is my father's primary bank account," I confirmed. "The exact same account he claims I maliciously stole money from. Now, officer, please read the exact dollar amount of the transfer. Did I transfer $8,400 out of his account?" Bennett stared at the screen for a long moment. He blinked hard. He looked up at my calm face, then looked back down at the undeniable digital proof on the screen. "No," Bennett said, his voice dropping to a flat, completely unimpressed, almost angry tone. "The amount transferred is $1. Exactly $1. And it clearly shows the funds were transferred from your account, directly into his account. You did not take anything." "And the memo line attached to the transfer?" I prompted. "The memo simply says, 'Best of luck,'" Bennett read aloud. I locked the phone screen with a sharp click and slid it smoothly back into my uniform pocket. I turned my head slowly and looked directly at my father. Arthur's face had completely, instantly drained of all color. He looked like he had just been violently struck by lightning. His jaw was slightly open, his eyes wide with absolute, terrifying realization. The arrogant, untouchable smirk was completely gone, completely wiped away, replaced by the naked, horrifying panic of a man who realized he had just walked himself straight off a massive legal cliff. That is completely fake," Arthur stammered, his voice suddenly sounding incredibly weak, high-pitched, and desperate. "He faked that screen. He is lying to you. He is a hacker. He stole my money." Officer Bennett turned around. He did not walk toward my father. He marched, The respectful, cautious deference Bennett had shown the former judge just 10 minutes ago completely vanished into the night air. It was instantly replaced by the cold, furious, highly dangerous anger of a law enforcement professional who realizes he has been maliciously used as a pawn in a sick family game. "Mr. Arthur," Bennett snapped, his voice sharp and cracking like a whip, "I have just visually verified a bank-certified, federally encrypted transaction record on a secure application. Your son did not take a single dime from you. He voluntarily sent you $1 of his own salary. You called 911. You demanded multiple emergency units respond to this location. You explicitly claimed a felony theft of over $8,000 had occurred. Do you have any actual, physical proof that funds are missing from your account?" Arthur took a stumbling step backward, hitting the bumper of his car. He started frantically patting his pockets, looking for a lifeline that did not exist. My bank statement hasn't updated yet. I just knew he did it. He owes me that money. He has an obligation to his family. He owes his brother that deposit money." The ugly truth finally slipped out of his mouth. He was so panicked he didn't even realize he had just loudly confessed to the entire neighborhood. Bennett stopped dead in his tracks, staring at the older man with absolute disgust. "He owes you money? Let me get this completely straight for my report. Your adult son refused to give you money for a business deposit. So you called the police department and completely fabricated a felony theft charge to terrorize him into paying you." "It's not a fabrication," Arthur yelled, desperately, pathetically trying to regain his shattered authority. "I am a retired judge. I know the law better than you. He is hoarding money that rightfully belongs to this family. You need to arrest him right now. The absolute only person leaving the street in handcuffs tonight might be you, sir," Bennett warned, his hand resting firmly on his radio microphone. "Filing a false police report is a severe crime. Wasting vital emergency department resources is a crime. You are standing on this man's private real estate, actively harassing him over a civil financial disagreement. You are completely out of line." Arthur completely lost his mind. His carefully maintained mask of sanity shattered into a million pieces. He lunged forward, not toward the police officer, but directly toward me. He raised his fist, his face twisted in pure, unadulterated, animalistic rage. "You arrogant little piece of trash!" he screamed at the top of his lungs. He never made it past the officer. Bennett and his partner immediately stepped in, grabbing Arthur firmly by the arms and shoving him roughly back against the side of his own luxury SUV. Arthur struggled wildly, screaming absolute obscenities, completely destroying any lingering shred of dignity or respect he had left in front of the entire neighborhood. But the show was not over. The ultimate trap was just about to close. Right as Officer Bennett was loudly demanding Arthur's driver's identification to write him a massive criminal citation, the deep, roaring sound of heavy tires approaching fast broke through the noise. Two massive, completely blacked-out Chevrolet Suburbans turned sharply onto my street. They didn't have loud police sirens, but they had intense, flashing blue Federal grille lights. They pulled up violently, intentionally blocking my father's SUV from the rear so he could not escape. The heavy doors flew open simultaneously, and four men dressed in tactical gear stepped out onto the pavement. The man in the lead was Officer Vance, the uncompromising head of federal security from the Naval Intelligence Base. Vance did not look like a local street cop. He looked like a highly trained military weapon. He walked directly up my driveway, completely ignoring the local police officers for a brief moment, and stopped right in front of me with perfect military posture. "Commander Julian," Vance said, saluting sharply. "Officer Vance," I replied, returning the salute with equal precision. Vance turned slowly, his boots crunching on the concrete, and looked directly at Arthur, who was still pinned against his SUV by the local cops. Arthur was staring at the federal agents with absolute, unadulterated terror in his eyes. He finally truly realized the massive magnitude of the federal apparatus he had foolishly triggered. "Arthur," Vance said, his voice echoing loudly and ominously in the quiet street. "I am the Director of Base Security for the United States Naval Installation. Exactly 3 days ago, you maliciously attempted to breach a federal military checkpoint. You aggressively demanded classified scheduling and location data regarding a highly decorated military intelligence commander. That constitutes a severe, prosecutable threat to national security and federal personnel." Arthur was physically shaking so hard I could hear his watch clinking against the side of the car. He is my son. I just wanted to talk to him about a college fund issue. I am a judge. You do not get to stalk a federal officer, regardless of your former title," Vance stated coldly, entirely unfazed. "We have pulled the high-definition security footage from Gate 4. We have documented your highly aggressive behavior. We are officially opening a massive federal investigation into your actions. Your name has been permanently flagged in the federal database. If you come within 5 miles of that military installation again, you will be immediately arrested by federal marshals and charged under the Espionage and Federal Harassment Acts." Vance turned his head slightly to Officer Bennett. "Officer, what is the exact situation here tonight?" Bennett looked at the federal agents, completely realizing the massive gravity of the situation. "False police report, sir. He maliciously tried to claim his son stole $8,000 from his account. The son just definitively proved he only transferred $1. We were just about to cite him for wasting police resources and remove him from the property permanently." Vance nodded slowly. He looked back at my father, a former judge, a man who thought he ruthlessly ruled the world, currently pinned against his own car, surrounded by furious local police and heavily armed federal military security, completely exposed as a liar, a manipulator, and a fraud in front of his entire pristine neighborhood. "Take your criminal citation, Arthur," I said, stepping forward. My voice was calm, but it carried the absolute, crushing finality of a judge delivering a life sentence. "Get in your car. Leave my property immediately. And if you ever attempt to contact me, my wife, or my command again, I will let my lawyer, Marcus Stein, and the federal government take absolutely everything you own." Arthur did not say a single word. He was completely broken. He took the yellow citation paper from Officer Bennett with a violently trembling hand. He climbed slowly into his expensive SUV. He didn't look at me. He didn't look at the staring neighbors. He put the car in drive and sped away into the night, completely destroyed. I stood in my driveway, watching his red taillights disappear forever. I had won the war, but it didn't feel like a victory celebration. It just felt like attending a funeral for a family that never really existed. Let's pause for a moment. Thank you for staying with me this far. You're truly amazing. Please help me by liking the video and commenting the number 1 below so I know you've been here with me until this point. This not only helps more people discover this story, but also lets me know that my experiences mean something to someone. Your support is the greatest motivation for me to keep sharing the rest of this journey. The immediate, devastating aftermath of that chaotic night on my front lawn was swift, utterly brutal, and incredibly decisive. The very next morning, at exactly 9 a.m. sharp, my lawyer, Marcus Stein, marched confidently into the county courthouse and filed an emergency petition for a comprehensive, airtight, 2-year restraining order against Arthur. Because we walked into that courtroom armed with the indisputable police body camera footage, the formal criminal citation for a false police report, the massive binder of unhinged text messages, and the devastating 19-page federal incident report from Officer Vance regarding the security breach at the military base. The presiding judge did not even hesitate for a second. The judge, an old professional colleague of Arthur's who was clearly deeply disgusted and embarrassed by his former peer's criminal actions, signed the protective order immediately with a heavy stroke of his pen. Arthur was now legally barred from coming within 500 feet of me, my home, my brilliant wife, or my place of work. If he violated the strict parameters of the order even once, he would face immediate, unbailable jail time, completely bypassing all of his usual legal privileges and country club connections. Exactly 3 days later, Marcus Stein received a frantic, desperate phone call from a high-priced defense lawyer representing my father. The lawyer aggressively tried to play the role of the friendly peacemaker. He suggested in a smooth voice that Arthur was deeply stressed about family finances, that things had gotten entirely out of hand, and he formally requested a private mediation session to settle this unfortunate family misunderstanding quietly and keep it out of the public record. Marcus put the lawyer on speakerphone while I sat across from his massive mahogany desk, sipping a cup of coffee. "Counselor," Marcus said, his voice dripping with absolute venom and professional disdain, "let me be abundantly clear. There is no misunderstanding here. Your client committed a severe federal security violation and maliciously attempted to frame a highly decorated military officer for a felony to extort money. The restraining order remains in full, uncompromising effect. We will not mediate. We will not talk. We will not settle. If your client breaches this order by so much as sending a carrier pigeon, I will personally ensure he spends his golden retirement years in a federal facility. Do not ever call this office regarding a settlement again." Marcus slammed the phone down onto the receiver. It was the most beautiful, vindicating sound I had ever heard in my entire life. But the massive cleanup operation of my life was not quite finished. I still had to brutally deal with the spies and the enablers who had tried to ruin me. I drafted a single, incredibly precise, legally binding text message to my Aunt Clara and my former college friend, Greg. The message I sent them was identical. It contained a high-resolution PDF copy of the finalized restraining order and exactly one sentence. "I am fully aware of your malicious involvement and your attempts to gather financial intelligence for Arthur. If you ever contact me, my wife, or attempt to gather information about my life on behalf of my family again, you will be formally included as co-conspirators in the ongoing federal harassment investigation. Do not reply to this message." Neither of them ever replied. They vanished back into the shadows like the spineless cowards they truly were. Back at the Naval Military Base, the fallout from Mark, the jealous colleague who tried to weaponize my family trauma to steal my hard-earned promotion, was equally satisfying and permanent. Colonel Hayes called a full, mandatory staff meeting on a Friday morning. He stood at the front of the packed briefing room and formally, publicly commended me on my exceptional, flawless handling of a severe external security threat. He made it abundantly clear to everyone in the room that my security clearance was spotless, my integrity was absolute, and my position was untouchable. He then turned his attention to Mark. Colonel Hayes assigned Mark to completely manage the logistical archives, a windowless, dusty basement office entirely dedicated to tracking obsolete inventory and spare vehicle parts. Mark spent the next 6 agonizing months counting screws and filing paperwork in complete isolation before he finally broke down and quietly requested a transfer to a completely different, lower-tier base across the country. But the ultimate, most devastating karma of this entire saga did not happen to me. It happened exactly where it belonged, to Leo, the golden child. About 3 months after the absolute chaos on my lawn had settled, I was sitting peacefully in my living room reading a book when my phone rang. The caller ID showed my cousin Maya. Maya was one of the very few decent relatives on my mother's side who had actually sent Sarah and me a thoughtful wedding gift and a kind, handwritten card apologizing for missing the ceremony. I answered the phone cautiously. Maya's voice was highly hesitant, carrying the slightly guilty, breathless tone of someone who knows they are delivering massive, explosive family gossip. "Julian," Maya said softly, almost whispering, "I just thought you should know the truth before you hear it from someone else. Leo's wedding has been completely, permanently called off." I paused, slowly setting down my coffee mug on the coaster. What exactly happened? Maya let out a long, heavy breath. "Well, you know that massive, non-refundable deposit for that luxury venue he wanted so badly? Arthur never paid it. He physically couldn't. Arthur is currently spending an absolute fortune on high-priced federal defense attorneys to handle the ongoing investigation regarding his stunt at your military base. His liquid cash is completely tied up. But that isn't even the worst part of the story." I listened quietly, letting her speak. "Leo's fiancée found out everything," Maya continued, her voice gaining speed. "She found out that Arthur was under a massive federal investigation for harassing a military officer. She found out about the false police report he filed against you. She hired a private investigator and realized that Leo is entirely, pathetically financially dependent on a man who is currently facing massive legal ruin and a potential lawsuit. She realized Leo had no secret college fund left, no inheritance, and no ability to provide for her. She packed all of her bags and left him yesterday morning. She told Leo straight to his face that she refused to marry into a family of toxic, manipulative criminals. The golden child's perfectly curated, incredibly expensive world had completely collapsed around him. The luxury business venue was gone. The beautiful fiancée was gone. And the endless, flowing river of money from my father had finally dried up, completely drained by the massive legal consequences of his own staggering arrogance. "Thank you for telling me, Maya," I said honestly, feeling a strange sense of closure. "Are you okay, Julian?" she asked, her voice laced with genuine concern. "Is there anything you need from us?" "I am perfectly fine," I replied, and for the first time in 35 agonizing years, it was the absolute, undeniably honest truth. That evening, after getting off the phone with Maya, I did not celebrate Leo's massive downfall. I did not open a bottle of champagne. I did not call my parents to maliciously gloat over their ruined reputation. I didn't feel the burning need to rub my victory in their faces or post cryptic messages on the internet. Because the ultimate victory over a toxic family is not revenge. It is complete, total, unbroken indifference. Sarah and I spent that entire weekend entirely at home, completely disconnected from the drama of the outside world. We didn't travel. We didn't host a loud party. We didn't feel the need to perform our happiness for anyone on social media to prove a point. We simply existed in the beautiful, quiet, unshakable peace that we had fiercely fought to build together. Saturday night, we ordered takeout from our favorite local Italian restaurant. We sat out on our back porch, eating quietly, and watched the sky do exactly what it always does in late summer, turning brilliant, unimaginable shades of deep orange and violent purple in the 30 minutes, right before the sun completely sets below the horizon. The air was cool and refreshing. The high-definition security cameras mounted on the corners of our property blinked with a quiet, steady green light, standing guard over our sanctuary. I held my warm coffee mug in both hands. Sarah rested her head gently on my shoulder, her breathing steady and calm. Somewhere out there, in a massive, lonely, heavily mortgaged suburban house, my father was probably still frantically pacing the hardwood floors. He was probably still desperately trying to spin his twisted version of events to anyone who would still listen to him. He was probably telling the very few friends he had left at the country club that his son was brainwashed, that the military had completely changed my personality, and that I had cruelly abandoned my loving family over a simple misunderstanding. I didn't know what his exact narrative was anymore, and the most incredibly beautiful part of my new life was that I simply did not care. I had the secure bank statements proving my innocence. I had the undeniable police body camera footage. I had the massive federal restraining order sitting in a fireproof safe in my office. But vastly more importantly than all the legal armor and documentation, I had this moment. I had a quiet, peaceful yard where nobody was screaming at me. I had a brilliant, fiercely loving wife who had looked at my deepest, ugliest wounds and never once flinched or judged me. I had a highly successful career built entirely on my own merit, my own sweat, and my own intelligence, not on the stolen wealth of a spoiled golden child. My father used to aggressively drill into my head that a man was absolutely nothing without his blood family. He used to sit at the dinner table and say that my military medals didn't matter, that my salary was irrelevant, and that true loyalty meant sacrificing your own happiness and financial stability for the people who happened to share your last name, no matter how terribly they treated you in return. He was incredibly, catastrophically wrong. Family is absolutely not a lifelong obligation you are born into like a prison sentence. Family is a sacred title, and it is a title that must be earned every single day through mutual respect, absolute honesty, and unconditional support. You do not owe your life, your hard-earned wealth, or your precious sanity to people who only view you as a financial resource to be endlessly exploited. Blood does not give anyone a free pass to abuse you. I spent 35 years of my life desperately trying to fill a bucket that had a massive hole in the bottom. I kept pouring my money, my precious time, and my desperate, childlike hope into my parents, foolishly believing that one day, if I just gave them enough of myself, they would finally turn around and love me the exact way they loved Leo. I finally, truly realized that the bucket was never going to fill up. The only way to survive, the only way to truly live, was to put the bucket down and walk away forever. I looked down at Sarah. She smiled up at me, her bright eyes reflecting the fading colors of the sunset. I pulled her closer to me, feeling the solid, undeniable reality of the life we had built. I am Julian. I am a military commander. I am a devoted husband. I am a survivor of financial and emotional abuse. And I am finally, truly, unconditionally free. Thank you so much for listening to my story today. I know it was a long journey, but it is a journey I know so many of you understand all too well. If there is one crucial thing I want you to take away from this video, it is that you are entirely allowed to protect your own peace. You are allowed to walk away from toxic people, even if they share your DNA, even if society tells you that you have to forgive them. Setting a firm boundary is not an act of cruelty. It is an act of absolute survival. You deserve to be surrounded by people who celebrate you, not people who tolerate you just to use you. Have you ever faced something similar with your own family? Have you ever had to make the agonizing decision to cut off a toxic relative to save yourself? Share your story in the comments below. I read every single one of them. And don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next journey we take together. Stay strong and protect your peace.